In the cold streets of Milwaukee, word travels fast. Names get made, names get buried, and most stories die on the corner they started on. But every once in a while, a kid comes out the gutter with so much game that the whole country ends up speaking his slang. This is the tale of a boy who watched the underworld from the sidewalk, stepped into it with both feet, and flipped pimp talk into power, respect, and a so-called $1,000,000 empire. From back alleys to bright lights, from whisper campaigns to worldwide laws of the game, his rise turned a local hustle into a brand the whole culture had to look at. Join us as we step inside the mind, the moves, and the madness of Pimpin Ken. Before anybody in the mill knew his name, there was a little boy born in 1964 in Chicago, Illinois, in a house with a babysitter who changed everything. Ken says he was only 3 when the babysitter raped him. She was dark-skinned, heavy-set, and she did sexual things to him that he did not understand. He did not even have words for it. All he had was confusion, pain, and a feeling that something was very wrong. He started banging the back of his head on the wall so much that his skull went flat in that spot. His mom saw the behavior, but she did not know why her baby was doing that. Nobody asked what really happened. Nobody protected him. That silence, that secret, is the first crack in the mind of the kid who would later become Pimpin Ken. By the time his family settled in Milwaukee, the streets already felt louder than the house. His father was a straight street dude, always outside, always in the mix. His mother was working non-stop just to keep the lights on. That meant a lot of the time the kids were home alone, trying to raise themselves while the outside world pulled at them. Milwaukee, the mill, was not a soft place. Violence, hustling, and fast money were always in view. Ken carried that 3-year-old wound with him, and since nobody named it, it turned into pure rage. He says he developed a hatred toward women and did not even know why for decades. He moved through the streets like a live wire, quick to fight, quick to press people, quick to reach for a gun. By his own words, he was in a lot of shootouts, putting pressure on anyone he did not like and taking whatever he wanted. On paper, the system said he was broken in a different way. All through school, he rode the yellow special education bus. Teachers told him he was dyslexic, mentally slow, not on the level of other kids. He believed them. His grades were bad. His focus was worse. While other students were moving forward, he felt stuck, labeled, and boxed in. The truth was simple, but hidden. He was not dumb. He was damaged. That early assault and that home life had twisted his mind long before he saw a classroom. Nobody connected the dots. So in the day, he felt like the slow kid teachers gave up on. And at night, he was turning into a young goon who did not care if things got violent. School gave him shame. The streets gave him a name. As he got older, the anger stopped being quiet. It turned into action. Ken talks about robbing people he should not have robbed and shooting at people just for hustling on the same block. He took every woman he wanted and only cared about money. He moved like somebody who had no emotional breaks. In his head, nobody had cared when he was a child, so he did not care about anybody now. That is classic hood logic. Get them before they get you. Take yours before someone takes it from you. He thought he was just a stone-cold street figure. Only years later, after reading psychology, did he realize that most of this was trauma talking. Back then, all he knew was that in the mill, reputation was everything, and he was building his off fear, aggression, and a mouth that did not back down. His path meant jail was not a matter of if, but when. As a teenager running around Milwaukee and Chicago, he landed in juvenile lockup more than once. Those buildings were full of older hustlers and pimps who saw the fire in him. Instead of school teachers, he now had block professors. They did not give him math homework. They gave him game. They taught him what he calls mental chess, how to think 3 moves ahead, how to read people, how to control a room with words instead of fists. They schooled him on manipulation, on how to flip pain into power, and how to keep your mouth shut around police so your name stays solid. Every time he came back out, his rep climbed a little higher. In that world, a kid who keeps his lips sealed and stands tall earns stripes fast. Ken says he did not wake up one day and decide, I'm going to be a pimp. At first, he was a wild hustler, not a player in the stable sense of the game. He was running with his partner JD, doing serious dirt, robbing jewelry stores, hitting banks, moving like a high-risk stick-up team. Then one day he saw something that shifted his focus. JD had 3 girls working with him. That caught Ken's eye more than any car or chain. He asked for one of them. JD gave him a woman named Dirty Red. She was 24. He was only 16. Instead of Ken teaching her, she ended up teaching him. Dirty Red put him onto the rules, the rhythm, and the mindset of pimping. That is how the Milwaukee kid took his first real step into the game. Not from a movie, but from a real woman who knew the streets and chose to lace him. The second time it happened, it was not an accident. Another man on the scene, Star Child, had a girl of his own. Ken saw her, saw the potential, and did something he now calls rewiring. He gave her new rules, a new way to see the game, a new sense of how things should run. She liked his program better and ended up choosing him instead. In Pimp Talk, that is a serious flex. It shows your mouthpiece is strong, your image is strong, and your confidence is real. Between what he learned from Dirty Red and what he proved with the Star Child's girl, Ken was no longer just some young goon. He was becoming a baby player, learning how to flip charm, control, and strategy into real power on the track. His lifestyle caught up with him again, and he went back behind the wall. This time, something changed. At first, he could barely read. He says a single book could take him 3 months to finish, and other inmates stopped lending him books because he held them so long. That embarrassed him, so he worked on it. He got his GED, then enrolled in the University of Wisconsin, Baraboo, through a prison college program. He pulled a 4.0 GPA and hit the dean's list. In the same world that once called him slow, he was now proving he was smart, very smart. He realized the school system had lied to him. The problem was never his brain, it was his broken childhood. Sitting in a cell with books in his hand, he started to think different. He began to fantasize about traveling, about real money, about luxury that did not come from hiding in alleys. And later, he says he lived all of it. That second prison run became a mind lab. Ken started reading heavy material like The 48 Laws of Power, The Prince, The Art of War, Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People, psychology titles, and persuasion books by Lieberman. These were not street corner pamphlets. They were manuals on power, influence, and strategy, and he began to see his old violence as childish, all that hitting first and shooting first as the mindset of someone with no plan. With every page, he built a new rule in his head. He says one line sums it up: you change your mentality, you change your reality. He started to pause before acting, to calculate instead of explode. The same sharp mind he once used just to scare people was now learning how to move people. That shift would be the foundation for everything he built next. When he touched back down, he stepped out like he had something to prove. Ken says he became Pimp of the Year. That was not just about a trophy. It was about how he carried himself on the stroll and in the clubs. He talks about being the first one in his lane, rocking Versace suits with real gold buttons. He threw a $100,000 bust-down Rolex on his wrist. His cars were luxury, not basic. His women wore mink coats and diamonds, looking like they walked straight out of a rap video. It was not just about looking fly. In the game, image is advertising. Every outfit said, "This is top-tier pimping." His style turned him into a walking billboard. The more he shined, the more his name moved from block talk to city talk. At first, Ken did not even want to be public about being a pimp. He preferred to stay low and let his money talk. That changed back in 1995 when he started hitting Bishop Don Magic Wand's parties. One night he got drunk and did what he calls popping his talk, talking wild, confident pimp talk in front of everybody. The room loved it. His voice, his metaphors, his little laws of the game landed like catchphrases. That night showed him that his personality could draw a crowd, not just a stable. Around the same time, HBO was shooting Pimps Up, Hoes Down. They spotted him, asked for his number, and later pulled up in Milwaukee to film. Many of the scenes people know from that documentary were actually his parties. He took the Chicago pimp scene flavor and moved the energy up to the mill, turning local street culture into something the cameras could not ignore. Once the cameras were on, Ken refused to be just background. He says he basically hijacked the situation by demanding credit and making sure his shine did not get edited out. He started filming his own footage to promote his own project, Pimpology. That DVD was not a small hustle. He landed 3 distribution deals. The same mouth that used to work on corners was now working in boardrooms and phone calls, locking in business plays. He was not just a player anymore. He was packaging the game. Street rules, slick quotes, and his whole persona were turning into content that could be sold. The culture around the game had always had its rituals, and one of the biggest was the Players Ball. Ken turned that into a business. He made the event itself a product. He charged around $100 per head to get in and around $2,500 for a table. That is high-end club money, not back alley cash. Now he was not just pimping women, he was pimping the image of pimping, selling tickets, selling DVDs, and selling access to a world that most people only knew from movies. Pimping had become a brand with price tags. With the events rolling, the DVDs moving, and his name ringing in hip-hop and street magazines, Ken started to phase out of the actual day-to-day pimping. He says he became a businessman. Instead of just standing on the track counting money from dates, he was throwing events, working on movies, and monetizing the culture itself. The game that once almost killed him was now his product line. He was shaping how the outside world saw pimps, how they talked, how they lived. Ken was awarded the coveted Mac of the Year title at the annual Players Ball. On the surface, it looked like a glamour story. Underneath, The trauma that started it all was still there, but he had learned how to flip it into business. In an interview, he was asked if pimps go looking for damaged women. Ken gives a dark answer. He says about 90% of the women he dealt with had been molested, often by their own fathers, or came out of broken homes. They already felt dirty and devalued before they ever met a pimp. Many had stepped into sex work alone, trying to survive. He argues that pimps do not create prostitutes. In his words, they organize them and help them monetize what they are already doing. He also insists that a pimp is not needed for a woman to make that money. She sees the cash first and then chooses whether to give it to a pimp. To make the point loud, he jokes about the National Pimp Association and calls himself the Michael Jordan of pimping. It is bravado, but it also shows how he sees himself inside that broken, exploitative system. Ken is clear that the game he came up in is not the game now. He says pimping basically died when technology took over. Women do not have to stand on cold corners anymore. They have phones, social media, booking apps, hotel connects, and OnlyFans. They can promote themselves straight to customers, keep the money, and move with less risk. The old idea of a man protecting them on the track does not fit the new world. In his view, the internet cut the middleman pimp out of a lot of lanes. He stretches the point further, saying social media also blows up marriages because people see options online they never had before. The same networks that made his face famous now make it harder for someone like him to exist in the classic sense. The game evolved, and old school pimps got left behind. When the interviewer asks how pimps get into a woman's head, Ken does not sugarcoat it. He says the game is all mental. When a woman is bringing in $1,000 a day, a pimp has to get creative to keep that cash flowing. He talks about real manipulation tactics. He might buy her a mink coat, then lie and say she still owes $10,000 on it, even though he already paid. He might lie about the rent on her apartment, inflating the number so she feels like she has to hustle harder. The goal is to keep her in permanent debt so she believes she cannot leave. At the same time, he teaches tricks to make more money, sometimes without sex, like working VIP rooms, pushing for big tips, and finding angles in every interaction. He calls all of that game. In his mind, pimping is not just about sex at all. It is psychological warfare, motivation, and storytelling, all mixed into one. In 1999, the Hughes brothers dropped American Pimp, a documentary that put the game on full display for the whole country. It is straight first-person interviews with pimps and hoes from all over the states, cut with old-school blaxploitation clips like The Mac and Dolomite, all showing off the lifestyle, the money, the cars, the suits, and the rules. They talk history, philosophy, and how they move day to day, from illegal tracks to legal spots like the Bunny Ranch in Nevada. Near the end, the shine turns dark, with stories of death, jail, and retired players trying to live straight. And sitting right there in that lineup is Mr. Ivy, also known as Pimpin Ken, turning the Milwaukee kid's name from hood rumor into documented game. Prison came back into his story again, this time on a bigger level. According to his own interviews, around 2005, he was hit with a federal sex trafficking indictment, then later pled guilty to money laundering and did about 18 months in a federal joint, a stretch he frames as the point where he started stepping off the old school track and leaning harder into entrepreneurship and mentorship, even though the official record on that timeline stays fuzzy. His first experience in federal lockup hit him hard. He talks about the shock of showering with around 20 men, the guards making him bend over and cough, the total loss of privacy. He hated that, so he did what he always did. He studied the room. He watched faces, eyes, hands. If he thought somebody might be a threat, he did not wait. He hit first, sometimes with a shank, sometimes with hands. He even remembers knocking out a huge inmate in the chow hall. He stayed away from gambling and debts and stuck with his own region, guys from Milwaukee, Detroit, Chicago. Over time, he became respected enough to be a Moorish leader with around 300 to 400 men under him spiritually. He read heavy on Islam and Black history, names like Dr. Ben and J.A. Rogers. He says he only had 2 real fights in federal prison, including slapping a white inmate for turning off BET. His line about that world is simple. Prison is easy if you do not get involved in dumb stuff. In the later stretch of his story, Ken says his mission shifted from stacking game for himself to pouring game into others. He works with Crips, Bloods, Vice Lords, young women, and artists through his hip-hop fraternity movement. A lot of the young women he meets tell him they were molested too. He uses his own story of childhood rape and survival to show them they are not alone and that their life is not over. He teaches them to control emotions, to believe in themselves, and to use their minds instead of impulse. He talks about a 15-second rule: stop, breathe, and think before you act. One of his lines is, "If I put my hand on you and hold you down, I cannot grow." That is his way of saying that when you spend your life holding people back, you stunt your own progress. He often shouts out people like Richie Rich, H2O, Cash, Candy, his artist PB Pluto, Jet Boy Cash, and his son Supreme, saying they inspire him now. He talks about PTSD in an interview. Ken does not keep it on soldiers. He says people from his world have their own version of it. Kids in black neighborhoods see murders, shootings, and death so often that it starts to feel normal. That, he says, is the real danger. The trauma never gets treated. Doctors do not call it PTSD, but the symptoms are there. He mentions public figures like Young Dolph as examples of how often violence hits the culture. By the end of the interview, when he is asked who he would come back as if he could live again, he does not pick some billionaire or movie star. He says he would come back as Cash, Richie Rich, or PB Pluto, the people close to him in the hip-hop fraternity, who live by principles he respects. He even gave out books like Ice-T's work and Across the Track by Boozy Badazz. In 2014, the game showed one of its ugliest mirrors in San Antonio, when a 45-year-old man named Glenn L. Dukes stepped into court with Pimpin Ken tattooed right across his forehead. Prosecutors said he ran 2 trap houses on the east side, pulling vulnerable women inside, feeding them crack or heroin, and then beating them if they did not move how he wanted, forcing them into prostitution for about 18 months between 2011 and 2013. After less than an hour, the jury found him guilty of continuous trafficking of persons, a charge that could bring 25 years to life. His own lawyer tried to say the state had not proved the case, even asking the jury if the women had been forced and led into lying, and calling Dukes sexually immoral, but not a trafficker, while the prosecutor painted him as an unapologetic pimp who used their abuse, addiction, and fear to lock them down. The jury never even heard that he still had a capital murder case pending for a 24-year-old former prostitute, and through it all, that forehead ink stayed there like a billboard, shouting out the name of the Milwaukee pimp whose image had already spread way beyond his own block. When the Milwaukee kid finally sat down with a pen instead of a pistol, he flipped the whole script on how street game gets told. Ken took everything he had lived in the alleys and motels and turned it into 2 books that hit the New York Times list: Pimpology, The 48 Laws of the Game, and The Art of Human Chess, a study guide to winning. Pimpology is the breakthrough one, published in 2007. In it, he draws a line between how the streets value power and how regular America pretends to play clean. He breaks pimping down as a method for getting money and control in any situation, not just on the track. The same kid the system once called slow was now selling rules like a hood Napoleon Hill, packaging the life into laws. The first law hits you like a slap. Purse first, ass last. Ken calls this the foundation of pimping. He tells a story about Little Bear, a seasoned player from a long line of pimps running his own club. A bad chick steps in and thinks she can flip the script, act like the money is hers to call. The lesson is simple, but cold. Tricks pay to hit, but a hoe has to pay a pimp first for the chance to even play. That move sets who really holds the power. If you are free, you are cheap. If people have to pay to get next to you, your value stays high. For Ken, being a pimp means you are the expensive piece on the board, never the discount item in the front window. Once you understand the purse, you have to understand the name. Law 2 says, get a name in the game. Ken talks about his father, Kali, known on the streets as Johnny Slick. Johnny was reckless, but smooth, always around pool tables and dice games in Chicago. And he drilled one thing into his sons: reputation is currency. He made his boys shout his name so they could feel its weight. When Ken hit his teen years and ran with JD, they rented limos, dressed loud, and threw money around just to build clout. JD turned real pimp quick, and Ken followed his lead, chasing his own handle. When he moved to New York and saw bigger sharks, he started doing wild, clever stunts, like tossing candy bars and dropping slick phrases just to make people remember who he was. In his world, a name is a credit card. If nobody knows it, it is declined on sight. Law 3 cuts straight through all the fake romance. Don't chase him, replace him. Ken remembers being young and sprung on a girl named Candy. He chased, he pressed, he tried to hold on. All it got him was headache. When he stopped chasing and moved on to another girl, Candy's interest suddenly jumped back. That was his first lesson, that in this game, people are like slots in a rotation, not trophies on a shelf. He watched other pimps do the same, never begging, never crying, just letting one person slide out while another slides in. The ism behind it is harsh. The one who runs after love in this life ends up the one getting played. Control means keeping your emotions on lock, ready to swap pieces without warning if the play starts to cost more than it pays. By Law 4, Ken is talking pure control. Keep a hoe in arrears. He describes a woman asking why she never really has money in her hand, why she always feels broke even though she is working. She knows the math is off and she feels trapped, The pimp answer is that he has to manage her situation so she does not spiral. But the real move is deeper. The whole point is to make sure she never feels fully independent. If she believes she cannot make choices without him, she stays locked in. Ken breaks down how keeping someone in debt, even if it is on paper and not real, keeps their mind soft. They start to see him as the manager and protector of their whole life. The ugly truth is that dependency is not an accident in this game. It is the design. Law 5 takes that design into darker ground. Prey on the weak. Ken talks about how many women in that life sit down with him and pour out stories about molestation, abuse, and the kind of trauma most people never speak on. He listens and then flips that pain into a pitch, promising big money, shine, and respect from clients. He tells them their value shows in the stacks they can pull and the attention they get. Under the surface, he is clear about the technique. Most of the women have low self-esteem, and that is the crack a pimp can slide into. He shows how you find or even build a weakness, tear a person down, then rebuild them to see you as the only one who can fix them. In his own words, that is how a pimp becomes the hero in a script he wrote himself. Law 6 is all about the cold loneliness of the lane. When pimping begins, friendship ends. Ken remembers being 16, learning under an older pimp named Aquarius, who schooled him on rules like reckless eyeballing and how to sweat another man's girl with style. Ken used those lessons on a woman named Bridget, who was originally with Aquarius. He talked her into choosing him, and when he bragged about it, he expected praise. Instead, Aquarius flipped out, dragged his name through the streets, and tried to kill his rep. The irony is that all that hate just made people talk about Ken more. The ism here is that there is no real friendship between pimps. The hustle is too grimy. Loyalty is temporary. At the end of the night, the game itself is the only thing that does not switch sides. By the time he gets to Law 7, Ken is thinking bigger. Pimp the game. Sitting in prison, he studied a different kind of hustler, Don King. Here was a man who came out of a dirty past and turned into the biggest boxing promoter in the world, selling a hairdo, a mouthpiece, and fights like the Rumble in the Jungle. That blueprint showed Ken there was another way to pimp. When the chance came in 1995 to host a players' ball in Milwaukee, he moved like a promoter, not just a street boss. He hit the Chicago ball, collected promises from big-name pimps, and built hype before he even had an event set. With sponsorships, flyers, and the right talk, he turned that ball into a huge show that pulled HBO cameras and hip-hop attention. The same mindset he once used for one block now aimed at a whole culture. Law 8 is about making sure your story does not vanish. Don't let your history be a mystery. Ken remembers an older mentor, Jim Dandy, talking about legendary pimps from back in the day. These were heavy names, but nobody young even knew them anymore. Their shine died with them. That bothered Ken. He decided he would not be one of those ghosts, so he threw an annual birthday bash that became a must-show face card in the scene, pulling top players every year. After Pimps Up, Hoes Down hit, and his face got burned into that documentary, he leaned into it instead of hiding. Every move was made to make sure when people talked about the game, his name sat in that conversation. The lesson is simple. If you want your legend to last, you have to build moments people cannot forget. Law 9 is about study. Learn the rules. Ken talks about how the movie The Mac hit him hard because it showed real pimping and hinted there were rules behind the swag. He wanted those rules, but the old heads guarded them like state secrets. That changed when he met a veteran named Ray. Ray schooled him on basics, like respecting another pimp's area, not tripping over a hoe, and never letting drama over a woman turn into a war. Ray warned him never to write these rules down because the wrong eyes could twist them. Ken flips it and compares the game to the NBA. He calls it the National Pimpin Association, but says it is a non-contact sport. The real fights are mental. The pimps who win are like chess players, always thinking a few moves ahead and sometimes even inventing new rules when the old ones are not enough. In Law 10, the kid who used to act off impulse now preaches strategy. Plan your work and work your plan. Ken tells a story about a robbery with a hustler named James that went sideways, not because they were weak, but because the plan was trash. That one flop taught him to stop trusting other people's blueprints and start checking everything himself. From then on, he investigated every play before stepping out. He even had the women on his team write down affirmations and goals so they could not dodge what they said they wanted. When he shifted into the entertainment game, he had to rewrite his plans over and over for almost 10 years. His line sums it up: if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. The twist is that planning is not a one-time thing. You adjust, rewrite, and keep pushing until the move finally hits. Law 11 is a warning to stay away from the fake tough guys. Avoid gorillas and Godzillas. Ken talks about a dude named G Money who dressed like a pimp but moved like a bully. These Magilla gorillas do not follow rules, do not respect the mental side, and go straight to violence whenever they feel insecure. They beat their women, stir up chaos, and put heat on everybody. Real pimps, Ken says, are supposed to play with brains, not fists. The way to kill a gorilla in this game is not a gun, it is cutting off his hose. Once the women leave, his whole image collapses. On a deeper level, the chapter is about protecting the standards of the lane. If clowns and crash dummies run wild, the whole scene loses any code it had left. By the time he gets to the middle laws, Ken is tightening the screws on how a pimp is supposed to think. Law 12 pounds in that ain't no love in this shit, meaning feelings get you robbed. Money comes first, everything else second. Law 13 says, pimp like your hoe less, so you never get lazy just because one girl's paying heavy. Rob Robertson from Milwaukee shows him how getting comfy with one earner can leave you broke when she walks. Law 14 is better turnout than a burnout, where Dirty Red's tired ways teach him that old bitter hoes can poison a stable, while fresh ones like Kim come in hungry, clean, and ready to learn. Law 15, say what you mean and mean what you say, ties back to a childhood lesson about taking money from his father and learning that a man's word is his only real ID. Law 16, give motivation and inspiration, explains why he dangles fur coats and jewelry as targets, using layaway and incentives like corporate bonuses, so his women grind harder because they feel like they are climbing, not just spinning in one spot. Law 17 talks about the backbone of his operation, get you a bottom bitch. He tells how a woman named Ivy worked crazy hours, bringing in money and acting like a second general, not just another player on the roster. He pumped her with confidence and made sure she saw herself as part of the vision, not just a body. Wrapped around that idea is the old cop and blow culture from the late 70s and early 80s, where one hoe could float through a string of pimps in a year. Most players accepted that if you lost a girl, you just watched her walk. But there was a pimp named Fly from DC who refused to move like that, showing there was always pressure between staying loyal to the old rules and trying to lock down new ones. Law 19 is where Ken finally admits the money has to move smarter, turn hoe ends into dividends. He remembers his father warning him not to blow every dollar, but as a young hustler he ignored it, chasing quick fun and ending up doing time. In jail, he met men who had seen serious money but had nothing left, just like him. An older pimp told him about making a fortune and then losing it all because he never saved, never invested, never thought about tomorrow. That talk hit different. When Ken came home, he opened a grocery store and started buying property. He explains how most street dudes live for the night and never think about an endgame. He talks about money vanishing fast if you do not put it to work, and drops a Bible-style line about how just stacking cash is not enough. It has to grow, or the future stays broke. Law 20 is pure psychology, get in a hoe's head. Ken admits his first teacher in that lane was his own first hoe, Dirty Red. Even though he was the one calling himself the pimp, she understood the mind of a working girl better than he did. She told him how certain behaviors mean a hoe is ready to leave, how fake smiles can hide a packed bag. He saw that most of them were not in love with turning tricks. They were chasing the love and validation they never got growing up. Every woman had different dreams, different triggers, and a pimp who wanted to. Stay on Top had to listen, not just bark orders. He says you can never fully know what is in a hoe's mind, but if you shut up long enough to hear her stories, you gain weapons you cannot buy. Law 21 and Law 22 show how control is half teaching, half movement. Law 21. A hoe without instruction is headed for self-destruction. Starts with Ken meeting a naive woman who is charmed by his luxury car and has no idea he is a pimp. He sees she is playing solo with no guidance, no protection, and he warns her that being out there alone is like walking into a war zone with no vest. A pimp, in his world, is the one who lays out rules so she does not get killed or robbed. Law 22, keep hoes on their toes, tells how he moved a young woman named Carmen from city to city, never letting her sit still long enough to build her own system. The constant travel kept her focused on survival and kept him as her only anchor. He learned that trick from JD, who would give his women a fake sense of freedom while making sure all the money still came back home. Law 23, a hoe joins a stable to ruin it, shows how one bad apple can wreck the whole set. Ken watches Aquarius work the track, testing a dope fiend's hoe just to show how he screens new women. Aquarius breaks down that a hoe with a negative attitude or wild drug habit can infect the rest of the stable fast, turning them against each other and against him. His rule is to cut that kind of problem early, because waiting for her to change is just begging for chaos. Law 24. Set the trend, pushes the idea that you cannot survive by copying everybody else. Real leaders do things no one has seen before, so the rest are forced to follow. If you do what everybody does, your name fades. If you set a pattern, your style becomes the standard. When Ken steps into laws 25 through 27, he is talking about image and silence. Law 25, grind for your shine, says that a real pimp should look more like a high-end businessman than a cartoon. He focuses on clean, unique style, sharp clothes, and quality pieces instead of goofy costumes, because true shine comes from effort, not just loud colors. Law 26, the game is to be sold, not told, goes back to him watching violence as a kid and learning to keep quiet, then later noticing how older players would shut conversations down whenever he got too close. They knew knowledge was money, so they never gave it away free. Law 27, keep your game on the low, makes that point even sharper. He explains how he never told anyone his real net worth or exactly how many women he had. He would even lie that he had hoes in other cities just to make the Milwaukee ones feel special and chosen. For him, mystery is part of the hustle. The next few laws are about running people like a squad. Law 28, be a leader, is simple. A pimp who cannot lead will end up following his own hoes. Law 29, play one hoe against the next, leans on the old trick of using jealousy to keep everyone sharp, making each woman feel like she has to outwork the others to keep her spot. Law 30, prosperity over popularity, reminds him that being liked means nothing if the pockets are empty. Law 31, look out for Susie Choosy, warns him that some women will jump from man to man chasing the next high, so you have to spot that type before she blows up your operation. Law 32, turn a tramp into a champ, shows how he focuses on upgrading a woman's look and presentation so she can pull higher paying clients. By changing hair, clothes, and attitude, he turns what looks like a throwaway into a top earner. By Law 33, Ken is thinking about who stands next to him. Bring your people with you to the top talks about rich guys rolling into clubs with broke, angry entourages and how that energy always turns sour. He remembers times when he and his friends lifted each other up instead, sharing money and shine so nobody felt played. That kind of support actually boosted his status. Law 34, show respect to get respect, tells a story about an older pimp trying to clown him for how he handled his money. Ken holds his ground, letting the man talk while still stressing that respect has to be earned with a real dedication to the craft, not just age. Law 35, trust nothing but the game, shows what happens when he trusts the wrong person. A friend sleeps with his girl's sister, and the whole house of cards crashes. From then on, he bans his women and his homies from mixing outside of business because in his experience, money makes people forget loyalty quick. Law 36, be internationally known, nationally recognized, and locally accepted is basically the mission statement behind his whole brand, even when the details stay light. Law 37, let a hoe know, plays out in Magic City in Atlanta, where he deals with a stripper trying to hustle him. He checks her by making it clear he is not some random trick, he is a pimp, and if she wants to be around him, she has to bring money, not just take it. He draws a sharp line between entertainers and his hoes, and even flips the conversation so that she ends up offering him money, which is his way of proving his position. Law 38, wreck a hater, shows how he handles enemies without touching them. When a man starts trying to undermine him, Ken stays quiet, gathers information, and watches him get comfortable. At a Super Bowl party, he exposed the dude as an FBI informant with no real game, killing his rep in one hit. For Ken, silence and timing beat fists every time. Law 39, switch up, comes straight from watching his father Johnny Slick live two lives. One as a street hustler, one as a family man. Johnny taught him that survival means changing masks when you need to, sometimes barking, sometimes blending into the wallpaper. That lesson becomes a guiding line in Ken's own career. Law 40, don't down him, crown him, talks about how even haters like Aquarius accidentally did him a favor by talking bad about him, because in this world, all buzz is good buzz. People hear the name, then come look for themselves. Law 41, keep your front up till you come up, tells about a rough trip to Vegas where he is losing money at the tables but still walking the casino with 4 women, dressed sharp and talking like he is winning. He lies about upcoming shopping trips and big plans until his luck finally flips and he covers some of the loss. The lesson is that once a woman senses you are broke, she starts looking for the next sponsor. In his eyes, you never let them see the crack in the armor. Law 42, if you can see it, you can be it, leans on the famous line, whatever the mind of man can conceive and believe, it can achieve. Ken talks about isolating himself, sitting alone and meditating on images of the top players, picturing their cars, their suits, their movements, and imagining where he would stand in that circle. He treated visualization like a daily grind. Law 43, talk shit and swallow spit, goes back to a night in 1996 at a Tyson fight in Vegas. where he meets his idol Don King. They trade jokes, and Don King's success without chasing college degrees hits him hard. That exchange makes his own women laugh and reminds everybody in the room that his mouthpiece can hold its own with a legend. The ism is that leaders in this life need a sharp tongue. You cannot run anything if you cannot talk. Law 44, you need fire, and desire keeps that energy going, stressing that without hunger and drive, all the talk and daydreaming in the world does not mean anything. The last stretch of the book is about stripping away excuses. Law 45, get rid of the word if, is about killing that weak halfway mindset. If you say if all the time, you already left a back door open for failure. Law 46, move and shake like a pimp shakes, pushes constant motion, reminding him that this game rewards those who stay active, flexible, and ready to move with any shift in the streets or the industry. Law 47, pimping is what you do, not who you are, quietly separates the man from the mask, hinting that the role is a job, not a soul. And Law 48, don't believe the hype, closes the circle by warning him not to get drunk on his own legend. In a world built on talk, flash, and rumors, the Milwaukee kid who turned his life into 48 laws still tells himself one last rule: the game is real, the hype is not. The book sells the idea that if you study the game like school, you can flip charm, pressure, and timing into control. And that real change starts in the mind, not in your clothes. But those pages did not stay in Milwaukee or in barbershops. One of the wildest echoes of Ken's work showed up years later in 2024 in a federal case involving a Jamaican pimp called Damian St. Patrick Baston, known on the streets as Drac. This dude moved like a movie villain, dressing up as a vampire with yellow contacts and gold fangs, flying from Florida to Australia, the Emirates, Russia, China, Brazil, and more, while forcing women into prostitution. In court, it came out that he had taught himself how to pimp by studying Pimpology, like a training manual. That is when Ken's laws stopped being just hood talk and became evidence inside a courtroom, showing how far his words had traveled and how dark some people were willing to take them. The 11th Circuit did not just mention the book, it locked in on one of Ken's coldest ideas. Law 5, prey on the weak. The judges used that language to describe how Drac moved on women who had already been sexually abused as children, picking them because they were broken and easier to control. The appellate opinion even cited Pimpology, the 48 laws of the game by name, calling out that law as a match for how he chose his victims. Drac tried to argue that some of what he did was in places where prostitution is legal, like parts of Australia, so it should not count the same. The court shut that down and said that if you use force, fraud, or fear to push someone into a commercial sex act, it is still illegal under US law, no matter what country you are hiding in. They upheld his conviction, left him with 27 years, and opened the door for even more restitution, adding hundreds of thousands of dollars in extra payback for victims overseas. The larger pattern is clear. The era that made Pimpin Ken famous also pulled his world under a brighter, harsher spotlight. Laws around trafficking got tighter, public tolerance dropped, and the old player image started getting dragged into debates about exploitation and abuse. At the same time, the internet flipped the hustle. Instead of only being known as the flashy Milwaukee pimp, he positioned himself as a strategist, an author, and a pimp philosopher, breaking down power plays for a wider crowd. His books, his podcast, A View from the Game, and his media appearances all work the same angle. The idea that the game is less about sex and more about reading people, planning moves, and using stories to steer outcomes. He still leans on his old slogans and players' ball clout, but now they are framed as lessons about planning, discipline, and mental warfare, instead of just bragging about what went down in a motel hallway. That is the real flip in his story. The kid from Milwaukee took an illegal lifestyle that could have buried him and repackaged it as pop culture IP. The suits, the quotes, the cadence, the laws, all of it becomes a product you can buy in a bookstore, stream on a podcast app, or quote in a boardroom. That polish does not erase the backlash. Critics look at everything around Pimpin Ken and say the pimp myth glamorizes abuse, violence, and trauma. You have to have the ability to move and shake like a chess player. You might make a move today, but what you're really doing is setting yourself up 10 moves ahead. Get rid of the burnouts in your life. You can't help them. They have to help themselves. You have to be able to roll with the punches, take what comes at you, and have enough inside to brush the dirt off your shoulder and keep mashing for your ration. If you catch feelings, your pimp game is done. Money is all that matters. When a stock drops, you drop the stock. That is the kind of cold line that sums up Pimpin Ken's whole world. In his game, feelings were a liability, mercy was expensive, and every move was about staying on top, no matter who cracked underneath. He turned that mindset into laws, slogans, and slick one-liners that reached way past Milwaukee blocks and players' balls. For some people, his quotes sounded like keys to power. For others, they sound like red flags. Because at the end of the day, behind the furs, the lights, the books, and the interviews, one thing still hangs in the air. What did all this pimping really build, and what did it break for good? So when you look at the so-called Milwaukee kid who turned game into a $1 million empire, what do you really see? Is this the story of a mastermind who beat the system? Or a man who just found a louder way to sell the same pain he came from? Are these laws of the game real wisdom, or just a prettier mask on something ugly? And when the money's counted and the cameras turn off, who actually walked away winning? Let us know what you think in the comments box below. And if you liked how we presented you this video, hit that like button and make sure to subscribe for more.